Well, good evening, everybody. It's good to see you. Got some people enjoying spring break this week. I know a lot of kids that are. The lesson tonight, if you would, turn to Mark chapter 14. We're going to read the first 9 verses. Mark chapter 14, starting in verse 1. It says, after 2 days was the feast of the Passover and of unleavened bread. And the chief priests and the scribes sought how they might take him by crowd, talking about Jesus, and put him to death. But they said, not on the feast day, lest there be an uproar of the people. And being in Bethany, in the house of Simon the leper, as he sat at meat, there came a woman having an alabaster box of ointment of spikenard, very precious. And she brake the box and poured it on his head. There were some that had indignation within themselves and said, why was this waste of the ointment made? For it might have been sold for more than 300 pence and have been given to the poor. And they murmured against her. And Jesus said, let her alone. Why trouble ye her? She hath wrought a good work on me. For ye have the poor with you always, and whensoever you may do to them good. But me ye have not always. She hath done what she could. She is come aforehand to anoint my body to the burying. Verily I say unto you, wheresoever this gospel shall be preached throughout the world, the whole world, this also that she hath done shall be spoken of for a memorial of her. You know, the message Sunday morning Robert Wallace brought about being a servant, and that was a lesson that Jesus had been trying to teach his apostles. It hadn't went over very well. You know, they were still arguing about who was going to be the greatest and have the highest position in the kingdom. You know, I think sometimes probably the Lord's still trying to teach us that same lesson, that you know, we just need to be servants, not worry about what kind of position we're going to have. Most of the time, we just do things that benefit us. And I thought about the example that Brother Wallace used about just picking up a bundle of sticks that lady was carrying and helping her. It seemed like a real insignificant thing, but he told us about the impact that it had on that whole village there. And we never do know how much or what can happen when we serve the Lord just because we want to, that God can use that if we're willing to serve. And the lesson tonight, we're going to look at a lady named Mary. This is the sister of Martha and Lazarus. They all three of them love the Lord. Let's kind of look at how she served the Lord, and especially about what Jesus said about her and her service, the way he commended her for what she did. What led me to these scriptures, that message on Sunday reminded me of something that took place, something over 40 years ago probably, and it's stuck with me ever since. I don't know if y'all knew him or not. Martha may have. You remember Arthur Flanagan? She does. Maybe a few here that do. But he was a Baptist preacher, and that was Danny Flanagan's uncle, Clyde's brother. And of course, after he died, his wife was named Algie Flanagan. And after they didn't have any kids, she couldn't drive or never did drive. They were members up at Calvary Church, and she stayed faithful to the Lord, doing what she could until the time that she died. Her funeral service was up at Calvary, and Brother Bill Hitt was the pastor up there then. And he used these scriptures to preach her funeral that day. And why it stuck with me for between 40 and 50 years, I guess. I don't know the exact time. But even to this day, I still remember that he said she has done what she could. She was really limited on what she could do because of her health, because of her age, the fact she couldn't drive, but she still stayed faithful to the Lord. We'll look at a few things here tonight that took place here at Simon's house, and also some events preceding this that kind of leads us to where they were at here. You know, this was the last week before Jesus' crucifixion. Matter of fact, it tells us up there in verse 1 that it was 2 days before the Passover, and there was a lot of stuff happening around Jerusalem that whole week before the crucifixion, leading up to the Passover. There were a lot of crowds, big crowd of people that were there, a lot of going in and out of town. You remember, this holiday was real special to the Jews because it went back all the way to when they left out of Egypt from the Egyptian bondage. Remember, it was started there that night whenever God told them to set aside that lamb that was without spot and without blemish, and they were to offer that at a particular time in the afternoon. And that blood was supposed to be sprinkled on the doorpost and on the lintel over the door. And the families that did that, then the death angel that night passed over them. And of course, the Egyptians found out that God meant what he said. The Bible says that every family of the Egyptians, even down to their animals, that the firstborn died that night because they didn't have the blood applied. But Jesus was actually the fulfillment of all of that. You know, the Bible tells us, I think it's in 1 Corinthians, that it talks about Jesus being our Passover. And a lot of the stuff that took place during this week here that led up to this, that it fulfilled Old Testament scriptures about, even down to a lot of little minute details of what took place there. One of the things that took place that week leading up to this was that triumphant entry into Jerusalem. You know, there was a big procession coming into town. Jesus was riding on a donkey. The people spread out their clothes and cut down tree limbs and put in the way, kind of rolled out the red carpet for Jesus. And I really think that they intended on making him a king. That's what they were looking for, was a king to deliver them from Roman bondage. But and they even cried out, Hosanna, which we say, save us, or save us now. But they weren't, the saving part wasn't talking about saving their soul. It was talking about saving them from Roman bondage. They were really looking for Jesus to come then, like he is going to come when he comes back again, as the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. But that time, the first time he came to die for their sin and for ours, not to save them from the Roman bondage that they were in. They were just looking for him to come in a different way. Also during that week, Jesus cleansed the temple. This was the second time that he had done that. The first time that he did, about 3 years prior to this, he said they had made a house of merchandise out of God's house. This time that he came, he called it a den of thieves. It was a place for them to make money. They missed the whole point of what the house of God was supposed to be for. Jesus told them that it was a house of prayer for all nations. And the Bible tells us also that he would teach daily in the temple, and that in the book of Matthew, he talks about how he had healed those that were blind and lame during that week. But then in the evening, he would retire back to Bethany along with the 12 apostles. And this is where we get to the situation we just got through reading about here. They went back out to Simon the leper's house that night. This was only probably 2 or 3 miles east of Jerusalem, where they went to. You know, Martha and Mary and Lazarus also lived out at Bethany. But they were in Simon the leper's house. There's a similar event that took place in Luke chapter 7, and there was some similarities there. The guy's name was Simon, just like it was here, but in that case, he was a Pharisee. Matter of fact, a self-righteous Pharisee. There was a woman there that anointed Jesus, similar to what we see here in this one, but this is a different account. There was some similarities to it, but some of the details were different. That woman on that occasion was anointing Jesus, showing her gratitude for the forgiveness she had received. And evidently she was what we'd call a pretty bad sinner. At least that's what Simon the Pharisee said. That Jesus knew what kind of a woman she was, that he wouldn't be dealing with her that way. But anyway, in the lesson here in chapter 14, Simon the leper, he's the one that hosted this event. Evidently he was he calls him a leper, but evidently he was a former leper. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been there, in public with these other people. It wouldn't have been lawful for him to do that. But and I suspect probably, the Bible doesn't say, he's probably one of those that Jesus had healed earlier in his ministry. there was a pretty good crowd of people there. I don't know how big the house was, the Bible doesn't say, but you get to thinking about it. There was Jesus, the 12 apostles, there was Mary, Martha, there was Lazarus, and Simon. If there wasn't anybody else there besides that, that's at least 17 people that were there. Now, I know the main part of this deals with Mary's service for the Lord, but there's something here don't overlook too. There were some other ways that people served. Simon offered his house for them to meet in. I suppose, unless it was to bring your own dinner, I don't know. I suppose he furnished the food that they ate. And then it tells us over in John chapter 12 that it doesn't mention it here in Mark's account. It didn't even tell us who the woman was, but in John's account it tells us that it was Mary that anointed Jesus. But it also says in that same account that Martha served. That ring a bell to you, Martha? And it's chicken spaghetti, huh? Okay, maybe you're right. Maybe they go a long way. That's Martha's funeral food, is chicken and spaghetti. But as usual, Martha was serving. You remember there was an early account in Luke chapter 10 where Martha was serving and Mary was sitting at the feet of Jesus listening to him teach. And Martha complained about it to Jesus, said, hey, make her come help me, that Jesus left me in here all alone. And I don't know all the situations here, but I can just see him shaking his head, Martha, Martha. But he said, you're just worried about too many things. He said, Mary has chosen the good part. Now, you don't see that in this. Maybe she learned her lesson in that. You don't see Martha complaining about Mary not helping here in this situation. Maybe, at least it's not recorded that she complained anyway. And during this time, Mary started anointing Jesus. She had come prepared to offer something to Jesus. This wasn't their house. She had brought it with her. She had planned it ahead of time. What do you think her motive was? I know Jesus gives a little bit of a glimpse down here a little bit later, but why would Mary do something like this for something so expensive? Any ideas? I think she did. She got it, didn't she? We'll talk about that some more here in a minute, but I think things I thought about was she loved the Lord. I think she figured out what was fixing to happen. She was thankful. She had been forgiven of her sins. Perhaps it was she just wanted to worship the Lord. These were things that crossed my mind. The Bible says this was a flask of aromatic fragrance, is what we would call it, or perfume, or what's the word? Potpourri, or something that. But it says it was very precious, and that word that's used there just means it was very expensive. It was a costly thing. One of the odd things that may be all we knew about this stuff. It had not been for Judas, because down just a little bit later on, Judas said that stuff was worth 300 pence, and he called it a waste. He put his pencil to it and figured out what it was worth. But you get an idea of what that. What a year's wages was at that time. It was basically this 300 pence. He's talking about this was worth about a year's wages, and it caused a little bit of a squabble among some of those that were there. But she gave every bit of it. She broke the flask and poured it out on Jesus' head. And in John's account, he said that he actually run down on his feet, and she washed his feet with her hair. But I want you to notice some things about this. Mary came prepared to offer this. She didn't wave her hand and say, hey, Pharisee, he probably waved his hand, y'all watch what I'm fixing to do. That they wanted people to notice. They pretty well did that with their prayers and their offerings and all of that, but even with their fasting. But Mary didn't announce that what she was about to do. She didn't call any attention to herself. She just did it. One of the things too is it's kind of odd to me that it's not, at least not recorded here, that she said anything during this whole time. She just went about doing what she was doing. She did it not worrying about the cost or what other people would say. And we'll get to that part here in a minute, because there were some things said about it. What did Judas think about it? He said it's worth all this money, 300 pence. What did he think about it? He said it's a waste. Turn over to John chapter 12 just a minute. Now, in verse 4, then saith one of his disciples, Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, which should betray him. He says, why was not this ointment sold for 300 pence and given to the poor? But notice this. This he said, not that he cared for the poor, but because he was a thief and had the bag and bare what was put therein. He really didn't care about the poor at all. He could have gotten part of it himself. Got some of the proceeds out of that sale. That was the main reason why he complained about it. But Judas wasn't the only one. He was the one that spoke up, evidently. It may have been the only one that spoke up. But if you look at verse 4 back in Mark 14, it said, and then there were some that had indignation with themselves and said, why was this waste of the ointment made? And you look over in Matthew's account, it says, but when his disciples saw it, they had indignation. To what purpose is this waste? So it wasn't just Judas alone that criticized what Mary did here. Is anything ever wasted that you do for the Lord or give to the Lord? No, I don't think so. A lot of head shaking. I don't think so either. And in her mind, this wasn't a waste at all. This was something that she felt like Jesus deserved, and that's what she did. But even when you do something good, some people are going to complain about it. And that's what took place here. Mary was doing something very special. And something else too. And I don't know, I may read more into this than is there, but I don't think she stopped doing what she was doing. She just kept on about her business amongst the complaints. We have the inclination if somebody says something that's not right, like they did with her, we start trying to justify what we're doing. I say, well, you shouldn't say that. You don't know my heart and all, but you don't have any record of that. She just like she didn't hear them at all. She just kept on amongst the complaints and didn't stop. Something that's interesting here too to me, and I guess somewhat hypocritical too. Judas said, why was this waste of the ointment made? You go over to chapter 17 in the book of John, that prayer that Jesus prayed as they were going toward the Garden of Gethsemane. Jesus made the comment to the others about Judas being the son of perdition. That word perdition that's used there is the exact same word that's translated waste here in this narrative. So he was saying, Mary, you wasted this money here on this. But Jesus was saying, Judas, your whole life has been a waste. He would live and die without Jesus, and said he had just wasted his life that way. But notice, Jesus saw it differently than the other apostles did. In verse 6, he said, let her alone. Why do you trouble her? Says she's wrought or worked a good work on me. That word good there, it goes further than our word good usually does. It means something that's beautiful or something that's a worthy thing to do. That's the way Jesus looked at it. It was something very special to him, and he appreciated what she did. At least that's how Jesus saw it. Hey, in Jesus's, isn't he the only one that really matters anyway? It doesn't really matter what anybody else thinks. That as long as Jesus is happy with it, that should settle it anyway. If we can please him in what we do, it shouldn't make any difference what other people think or what they say. I know that's a hard thing for us to do sometimes, is to keep other people's thoughts and comments from bothering us. But hey, I don't see that with Mary here. She was determined to do what she did, and she didn't stop doing it. There's a scripture over in Romans chapter 14, verse 4. It says, "Who art thou that judgest another man's servant? To his own master he standeth or falleth." So she was serving the Lord, and what Jesus thought about it was really all that counted. And something else too. Jesus basically told the whole crowd, said, "I'm not going to be with you always," and because he knew what was fixing to happen. But Mary did this while she had opportunities to do it. And notice her reasoning in verse 8. Jesus made this comment. He says, "She had done what she could. She has come aforehand to anoint my body to the burying." Somebody mentioned it there, what I think Martha said about she figured it out. That I think Mary was one of the very few, maybe the only one, but she was at least one of the very few that had figured out what Jesus had been trying to teach them for quite a while now. That he said, "I'm fixing to die," when he was going to Jerusalem to die. Again, he was trying to prepare them for this time, but hey, look back up in verse 1 and 2 of Mark chapter 14. It says, "After 2 days was the feast of the Passover, and the unleavened bread, and chief priests and scribes saw how they might take him by craft and put him to death. But they said, not on the feast day, lest there be an uproar of the people." There was already a plan in place to kill Jesus. But matter of fact, there was some discussion among some of those that knew Jesus as to whether he would even come to the Passover feast, because they knew that these religious leaders were out to get Jesus. But it still didn't stop him from coming. And something else too about this. It kind of shows you how much God was in control of this whole situation. They had decided not to kill Jesus during this Passover here is not talking about the one day. It's talking, you had the Passover and then the Feast of Unleavened Bread. They were going to wait till that whole period of time passed and the crowds thinned out. That's what they're afraid of. Because Jesus was really popular with the, I hate to say common people, but the non-religious people anyway, that around Jerusalem there. But Jesus was messing up the plans of these big religious leaders that were there. And they were afraid of the people and the popularity of Jesus. So they decided, we're going to wait till after this. But there was something wrong with that. And not only did Jesus wind up being crucified at the Passover, but if you look at the way it corresponds, even the time of day that Jesus died corresponded with the time that lamb was sacrificed over in the Old Testament for the Passover, that lamb that was without spot and blemish. That's the way Jesus was. And you get to comparing a lot of those notes that took place around that Passover. You'll see that Jesus fit right in with what they did there during that Passover. God was still in control of all that when Jesus would offer up his life as a sacrifice for our sin. But then it tells us too that, and Jesus said this in verse 9, that wherever this gospel is preached, it was going to serve as a memorial or a reminder to those that heard it. What Mary did, I'm pretty sure she had no idea that we'd be talking about it over 2,000 years later. She did what she did. Hey, something else too to notice about this, and Brother Wallace brought this out Sunday morning, and you'll see it, and this same thought continued even when they were at the Passover meal. They were still arguing about who was going to be the greatest. And of course, it started with Peter or with James and John, but there were some of the others that kind of got into that squabble too about who's going to be the greatest. But you notice what it says here about Mary. She wound up with higher recognition than those others did, at least up until this time. That just because she served the Lord here, then she's written about it in the Bible, and we're still talking about it even today. But down in verse 8, Jesus says she has done what she could. Hey, that's all God asks any of us, isn't it? Just to do what we can, just what we're able to do. And He doesn't hold us accountable for anything that we're not able to do. Hey, I'll tell you, we probably do a lot more than what we think we can, though. We'll say that. Just do what we can. You remember Peter and John over in the book of Acts when they went up to the temple to pray, and they met a man there at the gate that was put there every day so that people could give him contributions, alms. It talks about that, and that's what he was expecting of them. The only problem was they didn't have any money, so they were limited in what they could do. And Peter told him, says, silver and gold have I none, but such as I have give I unto thee. And he said, in the name of Jesus Christ of Nazareth, rise up and walk. And he did. So they had something to offer, even though it wasn't what that man was looking for. He got a lot more than what he was looking for, a lot more than what he ever dreamed of when they came by that day. But they were willing to help the man, even though they couldn't give him what he wanted. I have this thought more every year, I guess. Some of y'all here probably know what I'm talking about. Sometimes in life we get to the point where we can't do the things that we used to do. I thought about you, Jimmy, that Jimmy was real good to help us on Brother Pete's house out there. You can't do that right now, can you? No, you see what I'm talking about? You do what you can while you can, but sometimes our health fails and we can't do the things that we used to do. And I know how that feels, and a lot of you know the same thing. But there's still always something that we can do for the Lord. I thought about Miss Flanagan, that she was always faithful. She with the women's group and with the church, that people had to come pick her up and all of that. But she was faithful to the Lord up until the time that she died. And you look at Paul, he wound up in prison. Well, what do? Well, you read when he wrote a bunch of books of the Bible while he was in prison to start with, and you read some of the things that are said in there, that he was able to witness to people. He was able to influence other people to pray for them. He even led a runaway slave to the Lord named Onesimus. You read over in the book of Philemon about that. Anyway, the main point of the lesson for tonight, and we'll close, is that we just need to do what we can. Now, Mary, I think, looked for the opportunity. If we look for an opportunity, we'll find it. Mary looked for the opportunity. She came prepared to do it. And again, we're still talking about her tonight, all these years later. Just do what we can while we can. And the Bible tells us that God will bless that. Even down to the giving of a cup of cold water, which doesn't seem like much, does it? That anything that we do for the Lord, He will be repaid for that. Any word from anybody before we dismiss tonight? Let's stand together then. Well, let's do it. Announcements to start with. I'm about to forget. Announcements. I know with men's breakfast on Sunday morning, 8 o'clock. Next Saturday, not this coming Saturday, but the next Saturday would be a work day here at church. Probably, 8 o'clock or so? I hadn't heard anybody say 8 o'clock. Okay. So remember that. What else? What about prayer requests then?